Hi, my name is Rick Stattler. I've been the specialist in Printed Manuscript Americana here at Swann Auction Galleries since 2007. What we cover here at Swann in the Americana department is basically the history of the Americas from the 15th century up through the 21st century. We have material from early colonial America, the American Revolution, the Civil War, the Wild West. We also cover material from Canadian Arctic all the way down to South America. It's a pretty wide-ranging department. We do 2 sales a year, and we also do 1 auction every year on Printed Manuscript Americana. I have a lot I would like to share with you from our upcoming Americana auction. What we have right now is the papers of an artist named Aralee Gall, who was an artist from Philadelphia. She was active mainly from about 1910 to the 1970s. She had a long and successful career in art and was very much a skilled marketer and promoter of her work. And that's what we see in these papers. We have 4 large boxes of her papers here. It includes everything from correspondence to exhibit catalogs, pretty much everything related to her career except for the art. But it definitely gives the entire story of her career, which is, for me, very interesting. Just as a few examples, I'll start off with something that gives you an idea of what her art looks like. We have exhibition catalogs and invitations. One thing that she was very big on was she had a global audience, and she took her work on tour. She went not only to Europe, as all the major artists did of her time, but also to Asia. She toured widely. She was in Japan and China. So she would bring her art there, exhibit, give lectures, teach classes in Asia, and then she'd come back with paintings she had done of Asia and sell them here. So it was a nice symmetry. Here's an exhibition of her recent paintings of the Orient by Aralee Gall at the Philadelphia Sketch Club in 1957. And a related invitation from the same event where she announces that the Japanese minister will be at the exhibition opening to introduce it. So she was a very skilled networker, bringing all sorts of people in to help promote the work. Here's another exhibition catalog from Macklin Galleries from 1948 with a list of all the titles. So if anyone is ever doing a catalog of her works, we've got all sorts of lists and inventories. Here's a price list, a manuscript price list that she did. We also have calendars and diaries of some of her activities. This is a very packed calendar of all the people she visited during a month in Asia. We also have evidence of the kind of active seeking after portrait commissions that she did. She would try and track down famous people, get them to sit for her, and then here's an unsuccessful solicitation from Indira Gandhi from 1966. I wish I could give you some time, but I literally have not a minute these days and cannot even rest in the afternoons, although I'm feeling very, very tired. The Mountbattens are here until the 18th, and I'm going on tour on the 19th. So that didn't work. But you throw enough spaghetti at the wall and some of it will stick. So here's a letter that she wrote to James Michener, the very popular author in the 1950s. You're extremely busy, I know, but I really would thrilled to get the go-ahead signal that I telephoned twice. I've been unsuccessful in hearing from you. On the back, he writes very, very quickly, "Dear Ms. Gall, I will be in on Tuesday at 10 o'clock. Very happy to see you, James Michener." So that one worked. And then we also have correspondence from some of our other customers, less distinguished people. This is a very long fan letter. "Dear Ara, this is to let you know that Mrs. L was and is truly delighted with the painting. So our fears were all for nothing. I know that you want me to tell you, and I hasten to do so. The picture is on the north wall of our large living room. It looks much finer than when I saw it at your studio. I am just as enthusiastic over the painting as Mrs. L is." We have many other letters like that where if she got a positive review from anyone, she would keep it, show that to other people, get more commissions. That's the kind of thing that we have in here. Again, we don't have the actual art, but we do have her palette. It's in 2 pieces. But this is from the collection as well, so that gives you sort of a visual of her at work. We have photographs of her and also a couple of her hand-drawn exhibit signs and even letters from her short-lived marriage, which is only vaguely alluded to in the biographical sources we see online. So for anyone who's interested in the study of Aralee Gall or women trying to make it in the art world in general in the early 20th century, this is really just a gold mine, and I hope somebody comes to appreciate it. What I'm sharing here are actually 2 lots here in our Americana auction. There are 2 silver print photographs by a frontier photographer named P.E. Larson. And oddly enough, we've never had a Larson photograph that I can find in any of our Americana sales, but 2 turned up for this sale from completely different consigners with completely different provenance. Larsson got his start. He was an immigrant from Sweden and came to Far West, started his studio in Yukon Territory up in Dawson City. And what we have here are two photographs from his longest residence in Goldfield, Nevada, which was a gold mining boom town that by the time of these photos in 1906 had a population of about 20,000, located between Las Vegas and Reno and not near anything else. The current population is just over 200. So it's a classic Western mining boom town. One thing that Larsson was interested in as far as his subject matter was the dissolute nature of life on the frontier. Both of these photos have a very similar content. I'll read the captions here. Such is life in the Far West. Early morning call and a gambling hall, as the photographer saw it. And what we have here are lists of horse races and odds. And you can see very clearly here the horse races are over, the results are in, and the bettors have not left the gambling hall. They're passed out on benches underneath the odds charts and on the floor underneath. Some of them are sleeping in chairs, and this is probably in part because they were intoxicated, and probably in part because being a boom town, I'm sure housing was extremely scarce at that time, and somebody who's coming into town as a minor may not have had easily available lodging, and after spending their money in the gambling hall, they might have been allowed to stay there for 5 cents or something like that. And here is something with very similar content. The caption here, a morning call in a beer hall. So here these gentlemen are arrayed on bar stools, and the gentleman is taking a little nap with his feet propped up on the table. Difficult to know if these fellows are just showing up for a drink in the morning or if they've been there since the night before. As I understand it, the mines in Goldfield ran 24 hours a day, so it's quite possible they're coming out from a night shift or something like that. Larsson was a bit of a moralist, and the only biography of Larsson, Frozen in Silver by Ronald Bailey, suggests that he was hostile to trade unions and might have posed this to show that these dissolute fellows were influenced by the Western Federation of Miners, whose poster is right here. Another influential philosopher, I think probably even more so for these gentlemen, was Budweiser. Budweiser is over here, and Rheingold beer, and a couple of other beer posters and tavern advertisements. So these photos they're interesting. They capture a slice of life in a frontier town. They're also a little bit exploitative. I mean, I'm sure we don't have releases from any of these fellows who were photographed, and we're not capturing them on their best day here, certainly. But this is sort of long after the first gold rush in San Francisco, when prospectors were showing up hoping they'd get rich and going out on their own in the gold field. These guys were showing up to work at a large industrial operation. They were never going to get rich. They were getting paid $2 or $3 a day or whatever it was. And this is how some of them spent their meager wages, which was upsetting to Larsson and interesting for us to look at 120 years later. One of the top lots in our auction is this first edition of New England's First Fruits. It was one of the 11 pamphlets issued by John Eliot to discuss what was happening in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in its earliest years. This was printed in 1643. It covers the earliest years of what we now know as New England, basically. The full title, as you can see here, is New England's First Fruits, in respect first of the conversion of some of the Indians, and second of the progress of learning in the college at Cambridge in Massachusetts Bay. So you can see right there, there's going to be some juicy stuff in here. This is mainly done to pacify their stockholders. It was a joint stock operation, and wealthy Puritans in England helped finance the settlers to come over to the Massachusetts Bay Colony. But then they were growing antsy a few years down the line because they were worried that these settlers were just trying to establish themselves, become modestly prosperous, and that they weren't doing anything to save souls. They went there with the idea that Boston was going to be a city on the hill, sort of a shining beacon for the rest of the world to admire. And they were starting by this point to get a little anxious, like, is this really happening? So this book was published as the first of a series of 11 tracts put together by John Eliot, the famous missionary, to let people back in England know what was happening. Of course, we do have conversion stories here in large numbers. Here's the famous story of Wuquash Cook, who was a local sachem. He was very skeptical at first. I'll read you Wuquash's initial ideas. He had low apprehensions of our God, having conceived him to be, as he said, but a mosquito god, or a god like unto a fly. and as mean thoughts of the English that served that God, that they were silly, weak men. But they managed to talk him into it by telling him horror stories about English victories in the Pequot War, and from then on he was able to concede that our God was a most dreadful God, and so he was able to gain a conversion on that point. This pamphlet also includes the first reference to an enslaved person in Massachusetts Bay Colony, a woman named Dorcas, who's well known to history through other sources as well. And she's here described only as a blackamoor maid that had long lived at Dorchester, New England. And they talk about her conversion. Heard her much admiring God's free grace to such a poor wretch as she was, that God, leaving all her friends and kindred still in their sins, should cast an eye upon her. Her fellow townspeople in Dorchester later helped her buy her freedom, and she was able to live out her days in Dorchester, Massachusetts. The second section is devoted entirely toward education in this new colony. And the reason they were so concerned about that is because they were worried that they were going to launch this new colony with hyper-educated ministers who were trained at Oxford and Cambridge, and they were going to come to the New World, and then that learning would sort of die out with them, and then you'd have these frontier ruffians who would succeed them. So that's why we have New England's first fruits in respect to the college and the proceedings of learning therein. This passage here is fairly famous. I'll read this first paragraph here. It pleased God to stir up the heart of one Mr. Harvard, a godly gentleman and a lover of learning, there living amongst us, to give one half of his estate toward the erecting of a college and all of his library. As you can imagine, that's the founding of Harvard, and that is the first mention in print of what is now Harvard University. And they're very proud of that. They have now a large plaque in the college. It's basically the first printing of the description of the founding of Harvard. And regardless of what you think about Harvard, that's the first college in America. So this pamphlet's tremendously important, not just for its detailed discussion of some of the Indian conversions that they have in here, or for the discussion of Dorcas, who was the first enslaved person in Massachusetts, or even just founding of Harvard. This is just basic foundational source on the history of Massachusetts Bay and by extension of the American project. And when people go back and debate, and they have been debating this for hundreds of years, the meaning of the Massachusetts Bay Colony and its founding, and whether it was a shining city on a hill or the launch of centuries of colonization and oppression and every nuance in between on that spectrum. And when they have those debates, this is one of the sources they're looking at. This is something that they are trying to tease out every little last detail on what these early settlers were thinking, what they were trying to accomplish, and how they perceived the world around them. So it's a tremendously important book, and very pleased to have it here.